Welcome to Alex and Annie, the Real Women of Vacation Rentals. I'm Alex.
And I'm Annie.
And we are joined today by Pete DeMeo of Travel Boom Marketing. And this is actually a three-peat. This is a repeat three-peat, the third time that Pete has joined us on the show. And I think on the second time, we said we couldn't believe we got him to come back after the first time. But
no kidding.
Wow, this is a record now. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to be on the show. I really enjoyed the first two episodes. And I was like, you know what? I bet we can even make one more work out of it this one.
I think we can get more than one or three out of you, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, this is my
Oh,
favorite part of
good.
the day. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you.
So if anybody is not familiar with the episodes that we've had in the past, I would definitely recommend going back and listening to them, because there's a lot of great content about direct bookings and marketing strategies and OTAs. And we'll include the links to those two episodes that Pete was on in the show notes. But Pete, before we get started, just in case somebody has not heard them, can you give our audience just a little bit of background on who you are and what your background has been?
Absolutely. So my name is Pete DeMeo. Like you said, I'm the COO of Travel Boom, and we are a agency that specializes in helping independent hoteliers succeed online. So if it's web development, pay-per-click management, meta management, email, you name it, websites, we do pretty much everything under the digital sun to help those independent hoteliers and small property groups really succeed and be able to drive more direct bookings.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So
Yeah.
you came back. We love to pick your brain on marketing. We love to pick your brain on all the things you know. And one of the things that we have discussed throughout our careers, but then also through the podcast, is the fact that there's a lot of things that hoteliers, hotel operators can learn from vacation rentals and vice versa. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was kind of front and center on everybody's mind as we went into like show season this past fall. And I think moving into 2023 is the worry of recession. Whether it's actually coming or it's not is still kind of debatable depending on what part of the business you're in or what market you're in. But we wanted to talk about I think it was, we were going to do the top 5 things that you could do to recession proof your property management marketing for the coming year. So we thought you were the best expert to bring on for that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's something that's definitely top of mind with everybody right now. We're seeing inflation starting to really creep up. We are seeing, people being a lot tighter with their wallets, and it's starting to change how people think about 2023 and their vacation plans. So there's a lot that hoteliers can do, or should I say property managers can do, to not necessarily, I say recession proof because that's a better clickbait headline. But the reality is what we're trying to do is batten down the hatches a little bit and make sure that we don't have waste or marketing that's not falling on the right ears. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish with our topic today.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a cleaning house, I feel like, because in COVID, we did the same thing, that when we didn't know when our next reservation or dollar was going to be coming in, we all had to take an extreme, pencil to the budget and look at what could be eliminated. And I think that's really something that people should do, and businesses should do every year, because if you don't look at it, things start creeping into your tech stack or your budget that you might not even be using anymore. So just making sure that you're checking up on that on an annual basis is just good business going forward. But I think your first point on how to recession proof your marketing actually speaks into that pretty well.
Right. So my very first point is to actually look at your invoices and your tech stack to see what you're not using. And I equate it to the 10 streaming services that we all have.
Yeah,
we all have Facebook, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO, you name it. And the reality is, if we're not using those, we're burning our personal budgets with no return whatsoever. And from a property manager's perspective, it's the exact situation. It's really easy to sign up for, back in the beginning of COVID days, we had paid Zoom accounts, paid WebEx accounts, paid GoToMeet accounts, and it was easy to forget that you're spending money there. But now that money's getting tighter, I think it's really smart to look at that and say, can I be just as effective with fewer tools that I'm not using?
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So are there any, like, just off the top of your mind, that you run into that you think that people could maybe say cut corners, but eliminate, that maybe they don't need going into the new year, that they could do, maybe they've learned enough from the software that they can be doing it themselves?
I think it's gonna be definitely on a case by case basis.
Sure.
One of the things that because I think coming out of COVID, we all did a pretty good job cutting those services that we weren't using at all. But then we became more reliant on the platforms that we did decide to keep. And as technology improves, it gives us an opportunity to go back to our vendors and say, hey, are there opportunities for me to reduce my budget? Look at those invoices that you're paying and make sure that the partners that you're using, you're fully utilizing their services. Perfect example is a lot of the email platforms that are out there now. You might be able to find a comparable platform that costs less, or you may realize that you may be paying for an AI component, let's say, to your email marketing that you're actually not employing on a day-to-day basis. Does it make sense to go ahead and start using that? If it doesn't, get with your vendor and see if you can reduce some costs there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even just making sure that the things that you have signed up for, that you're utilizing them to the fullest, because it might not be that you want to necessarily eliminate that service, but if it's something like you just mentioned, an AI component that is not being fully used, okay, well, now's the time. You've got a little bit of time before booking season starts to figure out how you can get that in motion and get the most out of it in the new year.
Yeah. And one specific example that I can think of, not from a property management perspective, but from an agency perspective, is going through and looking at our Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, all the things that Adobe offers. And what we realized is that we had a couple people who were power users, and we had a couple people who didn't realize that they even had a login. And you're paying a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what? Guess who's not getting Photoshop anymore?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, licenses and seats on any subscription type thing for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a good opportunity too, all the way around to renegotiate contracts. Like end of year,
sure.
just again, there may be parts of the contract that you had that were you needed a lot of training up front that you don't necessarily need that training, and you don't need the support that you needed when you initially onboarded with them. So go through those contracts and see what pieces of it might not be part of your operations currently, or you needed moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, what is tip number 2, Pete?
So the next thing I would say is, after you've made sure that you are efficient in terms of your invoices and tech stack, is to make sure that your analytic systems are truly optimized. And this goes beyond making sure that you have your login to GA4 or whatever platforms that you might be using, but really make sure that they work. I think this is one thing that I see happen time and time again, even with us, is, analytics is not a set it and forget it thing. It's something that you set and then you go back and test and retest and test again on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're able to see the performance of the marketing that you're putting in place. So if you have a paid campaign, you want to go through, test that pay-per-click campaign, make sure that you go through the entire process from the browser to the booking, and you can say, okay, look, Pete DeMayo went on, did a search, made a booking, and I can see that in my analytics as a tie back to my pay-per-click campaign. Those kind of things are just fundamental.
It's funny because that's actually in my new role at Costco. That is my number one initiative that I've said is that we need to figure out first. We need to go through all the tracking on all the different sources that we have and make sure everything is implemented correctly, because to get a baseline of where we're at now and where we want to go, you have to make sure that that's correct. And it's really easy for things to get changed over the years, that you were using certain variables or certain components, and that's how the tracking was tied. But as code has changed or programs are changed, that it disconnects. So definitely believe in that for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I would say track this all the way through, because a lot of times, like for instance, I have a client who has a legacy website, very old platform, and their hosting company upgraded the version of PHP that was on the server.
Yeah.
As a result, it broke one of the forms. Well, it didn't break one of the forms on their website. It stopped one of the forms on their website from feeding to their CRM. It was still sending confirmation or thank you emails out, and it was still storing the data locally in the database, but that connection to their CRM was broken. And they didn't know this for months until you go through and do that whole audit process. And then what you realize is, like, you've collected, it's kind of that old Seinfeld episode. You can take all the reservations you want, but if you don't fulfill them, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
And that client had that exact same problem where they were getting these requests, they were getting stored in a database and they were adding to an email database, but they were never
Yeah.
getting to CRM where an agent could respond to them.
Wow.
How do you suggest that companies handle something like that? So do you suggest that you have kind of like a playbook of all the different forms on your site, all the different places that things are supposed to connect? Because what also happens is if somebody in a business leaves, if your IT person or a marketing person leaves and they're the only one that knows what was supposed to be happening with that functionality, that's where the ball really gets dropped. So how do you suggest somebody would organize that?
I mean, Alex, that's a tough one. So in a perfect world, you'd
Post-it
have
notes.
what's that? Yeah.
Post-it notes.
Yeah, I suggest post-it notes, and particularly
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just write everything down.
Having don't open a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There goes the marketing budget.
All right, we got to start over again.
Literally blew right out the window.
Yeah, honestly, I think one of the best things that you can do is, right now we're talking about going through and auditing that process.
Mhm.
Let's audit and actually document it and have a flow chart somewhere that says
Yeah.
user
that's a good
enters,
idea.
they do a quote request for a vacation rental. It's going to go to my CRM. It's going to go to an email database. It's going to notify this person. It's going to do this. And that way you can come back, say 3 months down the road and check again and make sure it's all working properly. But there's really no easy way other than say, okay, it is the first of the month. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to test this form as if I'm a consumer, incognito browser, and go through the whole process.
Yeah, that's a really good practice, and probably one I wouldn't have thought of just because I never play in that side. But it makes me think of the conversation we had when we were talking about disaster preparation and marketing, and how you need to make sure like you turn campaigns off versus turning them back on. And I think a lot of times people get so busy, and for vacation rentals as a whole, this last year and the last 2 years, the seasonality has just extended because the demand has just continued to be there. So I think that people maybe, while they had a plan going into it that was implemented, they may not have gone back and checked, like, did we turn this campaign off? They still might be doing stuff to buy keywords for summer that they don't need to be buying in the winter and forgotten to turn some of that off. So that the whole audit process for your marketing is pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the other thing I would say as well is look at your analytics stack and figure out where you can make things easier.
Mhm.
So, one thing that I think a lot of people don't use enough is Google's Data Studio,
Mhm.
which is a kind of a visual reporting platform that can pull in Google Analytics data, can pull in your website data, CRM data, all kinds of good stuff, and create some simple dashboards that will help you audit that process. And that updates real time. So anytime you feel like checking, you just pull up your dashboard. You might see that there's no vacation quote request coming in. That tells you, oh, there probably should be. So let me roll up my sleeves or start my testing process to figure out why.
Yeah, and you don't ever want to rely on your vendors that help you, whether it's the service or an agency. You can't rely on them to be checking this for you. You really have to check it yourself. I mean, I think that's what ends up happening a lot of times is people just assume, well, they're still charging my credit card, it must still be working.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they're making sure it's working on your account.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They're just getting the money.
Yeah, and their part might be working. So in that example of the lead form that wasn't getting sent to the CRM, no, you have a lot of different vendors who are all working together theoretically, but if their portion's working, they're not going to know that something's broken. So if the CRM system, in that one example, they see leads aren't coming in, their system's not broken. They just see that they're not getting leads. So they're not going to necessarily raise a red flag. That's going to be on you as the vacation rental manager to handle that part.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. What do you think? I just want to ask you real quick on Google Analytics and GA4. Are you having your clients use both at this point? I mean, I'm sure you've switched most of them to GA4, got that installed, but are they running both the old and the new until GA4 takes over?
We are. So we have everybody is pretty much switched over to GA4. There's a few that we're still working on. That GA4 process is a little bit more complex than I think any marketer expected out of the gate. There's a lot of
it sounded like it.
Yeah.
But I don't see Google shutting off Universal Analytics at the end of July, like they say. I don't see how they can.
Yeah, I think it's more of they had to put a deadline to get people going that direction, but it seems hard to believe. But yeah, interesting. Okay, great. What is tip number 3?
All right. So number 3, I think, is the most important one that you should be doing if we're in a recession or not. But that's making sure that you're maximizing your owned assets. And what I mean by owned assets are things like your guest history database, your marketing database, your current guests. And even though it's not technically your owned assets, your social media presence and your social media profiles. Make sure you're doing everything you can to have a direct line of communication with your guests, and that your guests regard you very highly in terms of communications that they receive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We always talk about how in recessions, everything gets more expensive, including your marketing.
Yeah.
And if you have a very limited budget, or we have to start making cuts, you want to say, okay, I need to go out to my email database or my SMS database, whatever it might be, and I need that thing running at 110%. If I send out an email, I want to make sure my click-through rate, my conversion rates are through the roof. Because if that doesn't work, now I got to go to my paid media, such as pay-per-click, meta search, whatever it might be, to help augment my traffic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about owning your own audiences, right? And just making sure you have an always on presence with them. And that's really how, I've always approached marketing, both in previous roles and we'll be doing so with Casago, that you always have to have something out there. And even if it's not necessarily marketing, sales, special related, you want to stay top of mind, and just making sure you're doing that across the different verticals of those audiences, not just doing emails, not just doing social. You have to do it all. And it has to be kind of working in harmony there. Yep.
Now, and I would say I mentioned social assets as well. You have to be very careful there, because, while you have a presence on, multitude of different, social platforms, those are the social platforms get customers. You are getting to have access to them, but it's very limited access, and you may have to pay to reach a wider share of that audience. So make sure that is the thing, that's the icing on the cake versus the platform that you're relying on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say to anybody, a large majority of our listenership, they rely very heavily on Vrbo and Airbnb in particular, but other OTAs as well. Now is the time to be developing strategies to retarget those guests with specific messaging on why they want to book direct with you, so that they're not paying traveler fees, so that it's easier for them to communicate. And really, that can be a whole ongoing campaign. But if you have not set it up in that manner, just starting off the year that way, because believe me, come January 1st, Vrbo, Airbnb, and in big destination markets, they're going to be spending a lot of money on their own marketing and PPC campaigns up your costs. So go ahead, get to those guests, segment them out of your database so that you can get in touch with them and remind them that you're there and the local experts for them to book with.
That is so true. It's the same thing in the hotel world, where you can't rely on Expedia and Booking.com and all the other OTAs. It's the same thing with Airbnb and everybody else's. If it's not your guest, it is not their email address that's coming through. It is someone else's guest that you're fulfilling their booking.
Yep, that's right.
Channel should be used to build your database.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we take it for granted that, in our market here in Myrtle Beach, and where Annie is in Panama City Beach, we're markets that have been strong destinations for a long time, that have really played the long game in terms of building direct booking strategies. And we all kind of operate or have operated a little bit more like hotels as far as how we structure our marketing plans. But a lot of the companies that we talk to when we go to the vacation rental events, a lot of them have never done this stuff. They've never had a book direct strategy. They really have just relied on the OTAs. So the more you can lean into taking this time in the off season to planning for the next year and just really building out that long-term strategy, the better off you'll be.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go to the next one, Pete. Number 4.
So number 4 is, you've already had to make some cuts. We've cleaned up our wasted budgets, but we really need to keep planning for future cuts. And there's a saying, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the thing is, before you do that, you want to check to make sure that there's, you want to check the water first. You don't want to just dump everything out and you lose something important. So what I would say is, when time comes to actually cut budget, it's 3 months into 2023, and you see that I expected to have X budget and I need to now cut 30% off of it. War game that scenario and figure out where would I cut that now? So when that time comes, you don't have to stress and think about how you would remove 30% from your budget. You have that in your back pocket. You can say, oh, when I'm told to cut budget, this is the places where I think I need to cut it, where it'll be least impactful to putting heads in beds.
Right. Yeah, I think that's
Yes,
something
I
that
think-
people don't plan for is especially coming off the last 2 years. And I will say, one thing that I experienced with partners that I worked with is they came off a really great 2021. And I said to them, we have to be cautious as we go into 22 because it's not going to be the same. And we saw the numbers of like rentals growing in markets, and some markets were 100% more inventory. So while the demand was still really elevated, it seemed that demand was down because there was more inventory. But they didn't take that into account, that they needed to take the rates down. They needed to budget across the board and be prepared for when, again, it wasn't that the market went flat. It was just that there wasn't enough demand to fill all the inventory that was there. And then once they realized it was a problem, they were like, oh my gosh, I've got to stop doing all of these things, or I've got to let staff go, or I've got to cut back. And it's, to your point, if you can kind of foresee, read the tea leaves ahead of time and be prepared for it, it's not as painful. And it goes to the point of, how do you insulate yourself from things to come down the road? It's all about planning.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the sooner that you realize that you're going to have to make adjustments, the sooner you make those adjustments, the better.
Better,
You know, if you know that you're going to have to cut budget and you put in a strategy to make that happen, if it takes you 2 or 3 months to actually do that, you've spent 2 or 3 months worth of budget on things that you really may not have had the budget to spend it on. So
Right.
have that plan. So the moment you know you need to make a change, you can make it right away. You're not spending time and marketing budget planning when you don't know
Right.
any plan.
Exactly.
Not digging
Yeah.
a hole that you can't get out of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, even I don't think there's going to be a massive decrease in demand in 2023. Do you? I mean, I think rates are going to go down. We're going to lose some of that edge and increase and,
I think
extra top line
demand is going to
revenue, but-
stay. I think demand will go down, but I think what we're going to see is a lot of this inventory that popped on for the year that was one-off. Like, again, I mean, you look at some of the more urban markets, but Scottsdale and Houston and some of these markets that had like 50% growth. Panama City Beach had an enormous growth. Some of it was
Yeah.
a new hotel product, but there was a lot of people that just were like, I'm going to put my unit on rental. They never had done it before, and they
Right.
probably won't do it again. And I think so. I think we'll see a decline so the demand will seem to be down, but it'll just, I think it's just leveling off of what the market getting back to a more normal state,
Yeah.
a normal subset of what the industry was before. But
And I think that's where I agree with you on that. And I think, but from a rate perspective too, maybe that's what people need to be thinking about, is that, our margins were all so good these last couple of years,
Yeah.
that knowing that, demand's going to go down, we do not recommend cutting your rate significantly. But I mean, you've got to look at what the market's doing, and just
Yeah.
knowing that your margins on some bookings that you were making way more these last couple of years, you should probably expect to be closer to 2019. But that, just as far as marketing spend, you have to keep that in consideration.
Yeah. And also factor in that, it seems like 2023 could be a pretty good year in terms of, people wanting to travel and get out.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
from an inflation perspective, if, our management costs are increasing and the
Mhm.
customer is not willing to pay more, how is that different than a decline in people coming to stay at your property? At the
Yeah.
end of the day, from a, RevPAR perspective, you have a problem. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's on the expense side or if on the
Yeah.
occupancy side. Either way, you have to have a plan to address what is the root issue.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that goes where one of the things that Alex and I have talked about is that, a lot of people have a lot of analytic tools that they're using, a lot of data, and it's great, but you really have to understand your market and be in tune with your market and engage with your DMOs and engage with other, your competitive
Absolutely.
set within the market.
Yeah.
So you really know what's going on, because again, what's happening to you might not be happening to the guy next door, and you can
Yeah.
try to figure out why that is. And I think that some people like to operate in silos sometimes in their markets if it's a very hyper competitive market, and not understanding that you want to keep your friends close and your enemies just as close or closer, and that
Yeah.
for that reason alone, so you really have a good pulse on what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, creating strategic partnerships that would be number one tip that could be applied to so many different topics. But
Absolutely.
there's so much benefit to that. But
It
yeah,
is our
absolutely.
drumbeat.
It's
definitely
I
something.
mean, working with your local CVB DMO, that's huge. And It's interesting to also hear too. I mean, the more that we talk to vacation rental operators in other markets, that in a lot of markets, the CVB is not as big of a thing as it is in
Yeah.
Myrtle Beach or Panama City Beach or Destin, or, some of these historically very, the foundational vacation markets, but there still are opportunities through them. Maybe you don't know about. And I try and compare it to even in our market. If you're not if you don't know what your CVB is doing, if you're not in communication, you're automatically going to think that they're not really doing anything. And I've seen that happen with so many of our members, that once they get into the mix, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been missing all these opportunities for the last 3 years that I just, we had one person that managed the account and now we just never know what's going on. So just keep in touch with them and just see, because even if it's not massive opportunities, there will be some things you can find there that you probably haven't uncovered.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because really all a chamber or CVB is a pre-made strategic partnership that you can participate in.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's conduits to find other
it's there for the
like-minded
kids,
companies. Yeah,
Yeah, you don't have to start from
Yeah.
scratch. Go out and start knocking on
Yeah.
doors of your competitors, which you probably should be
Exactly.
doing regardless. But get involved with your chambers, get involved with your CVBs, and see what they have to offer. Again, a lot of times it's at almost no cost to you to participate in so many phenomenal opportunities.
And especially when it comes to advocacy too. So that's another point that we talk about, which is not related to this topic, but for sure.
It kind of is.
Yeah, it kind of, yeah.
It kind of is.
I mean, if regulations
be.
shut you
Yeah.
down, then you don't need a marketing budget, because you won't
Right,
be able to
exactly.
market and you won't be able to rent
Yeah.
your property.
Be
So
prepared.
it's all tied together. But yeah, creating those relationships so that when regulation issues do hit your community, you've got a strong alliance there to be able to fight together, and the people, and it's not awkward having to figure out relationships when you're also dealing with pretty tough legislation issues at the same time.
Yeah. And at that point, I think one of the things also just kind of on all this, just talking with and working with the DMOs, is that, coming off of 2 really good years specifically to vacation rentals, not so much to the hotel sector, because the hotel sector has always had a voice within DMOs and CVBs. Vacation rentals, not so much. And, part of it was just not knowing each other, not engaging with each other, but now there's a spotlight on it, and we're doing some stuff with Jennifer Barbie at Destination Innovate in January. And it's really the reason we got involved in it was we had her on the show, and she started to recognize with some of the DMOs that she was working with that there was a lot of vacation rental, short-term rental inventory in markets that these DMO CVBs didn't really know it was there. And they realized that they were very integral for them to survive through COVID. And so that they want to bring them into the fold. So again, Alex and I try to push to everybody, like, now is your time to be part of the conversation and get your voice heard and be part of the marketing. And again, be part of that planning and see where you can utilize their services, so you don't have to spend the money to do some of the things that you would typically be doing by listing on their websites or being part of the campaigns that they're paying for, that your bed tax dollars are going to offset. So again, there's a lot of ways to kind of shore up what you're doing by being involved and being active.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
Thank you. Okay. So I think the next thing we want to go to
Nice.
is
So you ready?
Sorry, I'm whipping past you, huh?
Oh, no, you're fine. I think I was going to say the exact same thing you were, which is the number 5 thing you should be doing. And that is make your guests crazy happy.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Of course.
our job is to be hospitable and make our guests love us.
Yes.
There's a Seth Godin quote that I love, and it says, people rarely buy what they need, they buy what they want. And people don't always cut their needs, or I'm sorry, they don't always cut their wants, they cut their needs.
Cut their needs, yeah.
As a property manager, you need to make sure that your property is exactly what they want. You want to invest in your infrastructure. You want to really instill the importance with your staff, and everybody, that you have to create a legendary experience. You don't want that guest leaving saying, "Oh, it was a nice day." You want them going back to the old
telling all their friends, "I just had the best day." Yeah.
Look at that social amplification tools that are out there, and make sure that the old saying of surprise and delight. It's somewhat cliche now, but it's so true. Make sure that your guests are just blown away by what you had to offer, that they have to tell everybody, and they have to make sure they come back next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Building your own audience and your own brand advocates. I mean, that is so beneficial to you. And that literally helps you cut down on having to spend on marketing when you have your guests that are
Advocate
loyal,
for
that
you.
they're out
Yeah.
there
Mhm.
spreading the love to their family and friends and saying, I just had the best time here. And of course, Flip to always comes up in any marketing conversation
Yeah.
that we have, but that's
Yep.
one of our favorite tools to be able to really, really amplify the reach of your current guests to get in front of their audiences, and just that builds almost a viral effect. So that's flip.to.
But and I think if it's Flip to, or if it's just making sure that when your guests are on property, you really instill that value. Everybody spends so much money driving leads to their website, driving conversions. Once you've invested all that money, plan some of that investment to be making sure that you retain that guest for the next year.
Absolutely.
That's who, like, we kind of go back up the list of other things that we want to do, like to, shore up our owned assets to make sure we're not wasting money. It all goes back to one thing, is making your guests crazy happy. If they're
Right,
banging on
yeah.
your door to come back, marketing becomes a lot less important when you already have 90% occupancy, because everyone will be crazy not to come back to you next year.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you're churning and burning guests every year and you're having to continuously spend, that's not a good sign. I mean, you should have a pretty good, healthy repeat guest rate. If you don't, maybe marketing isn't your main problem. It might be operational problems.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah, and I think to that point too, though, and I would counter that, what we're seeing in the industry is not as much repeat as used to be. Like, it used to be that people only went to one market and that's what they did. They went to one mountain market, one beach market, and now there's just so much out there for everybody to see. I think it goes to building up that guest experience, so that people are always talking about that experience, so that when your destination does come up in conversation, oh, this is where you need to go. So again, I think it's building kind of that reach through your guest experience. And I love the surprise and delight. Like, that is just such an easy way to put it, because there's so many times that the surprise and delight is reversed. You're delighted up front and you get that surprise when you get there is not what you wanted it to be. So really investing in that part of the journey is part of your marketing, and it needs to be something that right now you're retooling and saying, like, how can we, again, take the time in the off season to go stay in your properties, experience from the guest eyes, and understand, like, what are the things that I could do to make it better for them to stay with us and talk about us.
It's funny, Annie, that you say that, because the part about not always going to the same destination over and over again. Last year, me and the family went to Gatlinburg. We got a nice vacation rental property. We had a phenomenal time. We're probably not going back this year, only because we're going to try doing like a lake house or something a little bit different.
Sure.
But we had a phenomenal time. And I've told at least 3 other people, 2 of which I know are going to the area this year or in 2023.
Yeah.
So even though I'm not going there now, the experience that I had drove me to drive. Basically, think of that as me being a repeat guest 2 more times. Because the reason that those people are going is, hey, Pete had a phenomenal time. I know Pete and his family. I trust them. There's no higher, credibility factor than that.
Well, you need to make sure that you sign yourself up for points and give them your points number, so you
Right?
can get the points when they get
That's
back.
really what I should do. Yeah.
No, Pete points.
That's a really good point, because I think that people don't pay attention to the fact that you came and then they're asking, how did you hear about it? It's like, I think people don't do enough of that to understand that, yes, it may not be Pete coming back, but Pete recommended 2 people that came.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah.
and I don't know what the right answer is to do, because that's a lot of extra work, but I think it has to be something that's in your playbook of, are you asking these questions? How did you hear about us? Did someone recommend you choose us? So that you can look back at your database and go, oh, Pete came last year, probably isn't going to come this year, because again, you don't want to go to the same destination every year, likely anymore. But is Pete going to come back next year? Maybe send Pete a note, said, thanks for recommending us. We got 2 bookings off of you. We'd like to offer you a discount to come back in the future, something along those lines. But that's a lot of work to do on it.
I like Alex's idea of Pete points.
Pete points.
Yeah. So, hey, I know we said there's only 5 things, but I actually have one more little bonus.
A bonus, Pete. A bonus, Pete. I love it.
Ready? It's bonus points for Pete. It is keep some powder dry for opportunity.
Powder dry
Like
for
deodorant?
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Make sure that you gotta raise your hand at the arm if you're sure. No.
when you're sweating because
Yeah,
the bookings aren't coming in.
Yeah. You're
You've
gonna want
got
some
the
gold.
powder to
Yeah,
keep you
yeah.
dry.
Don't
Okay.
sweat it.
Buy Gold Bond.
New sponsor.
Yeah.
Yeah, new
So,
sponsor.
no, yeah. So in times like this, where we're heading into a recession, it's a time of flux. So things are going to change, which means opportunities are going to necessarily present themselves to you.
Mhm.
Make sure, even though we talked about cutting budget or having plan for cutting it, make sure you also have a plan if things start going really well, and you
Yeah,
have an
love that.
opportunity to
Yeah.
jump in. Alex, perfect example from a chamber perspective. A lot of times you might have remnant space, going back to the old print days, or an opportunity for a partnership, and you need to throw a couple $1,000s to it. If you're the person in the market that has the wherewithal to do so, it becomes a multiplier in your marketing efforts,
Mhm.
because your competitors are not able to take advantage of it. You have a little bit of your budget that's still ready to go. You can throw it at an opportunity real fast, take advantage of something, and capitalize before other people in the market can do so.
Absolutely. And I guess this
Good
is a little
point.
bit counterintuitive to some of the points that we've made about cutting your budget. But really,
Yeah.
when you look back to COVID, the companies that did keep their marketing going, and that was certainly the companies and the destinations that were able to keep their marketing going, saw massive gains in market share. So,
Mhm.
whether times are bad or if they are good, it's really, it's an opportunity to move the needle for your company. But yeah, having those having those plans of what you actually would put that budget to if you had a little bit more, but also being mindful of, even if things aren't as great next year, keeping yourself top of mind awareness.
Yep. Well, here's the other thing too to consider as well, is just because you have budget allocated for opportunities, if no opportunities come, you still have that budget available. So
Right.
you might, if I have to cut and I go through Q1 and there were no opportunities, I have budget that I can say, well, this last minute opportunity budget that I didn't use, that's part of what gets cut. So
Yeah.
you actually can be much more effective because you're planning for both opportunity to show up, but worst case scenario, if it doesn't, you have unspent money that you can then put toward things that might really need to have some
Yeah.
investment thrown toward them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Pete,
How
thank
mu-
you so much for all of this stuff. Alex, I'm sorry, did you have one last question before we wrap
no,
up?
no, that's fine.
So-
That's fine.
I think that what I would love to do is when we get on the other side, maybe into the quarter, the first quarter, kind of see where we are, like going into spring and summer. I'd love to have you back and kind of revisit this and see like where we're at, and maybe maybe everything's going gangbusters and we just give people more of the Pete points to marketing.
Peak points. Yeah.
points to
yeah.
marketing.
No, we're definitely on a roll now.
Yeah, I think
three Pete. It's
Yeah.
3 Pete. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, the reality is there's no way to recession proof your hotel marketing, but yeah, the goal is that you're better prepared to take care of your guest needs, and you're better prepared to handle whatever comes your way. And if you're the most prepared and your competition is not, it's going to put you in a better position.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And now's the time to do it. So it's
Yep.
just early December. You've got, depending on the month that you're in, I guess, if you're in a ski season, you're already in your heavy booking months right now. But if you're in beach destinations or on the East Coast, you've got a little bit of time before things start getting real busy. But thank you, Pete, again for coming on, and we will definitely have you back in 2023. I think we're going to have several more opportunities to have you on the show, because you're just such a great voice for the tourism, hotels, vacation rental, all of the parts of hospitality. You're very well versed, and we always enjoy talking to you, and it's always a good laugh and fun.
Well, I appreciate you making all those lies up for me for your
No,
audience.
it's true.
We love
It's
having you on,
definitely
Pete.
true.
Yeah, we
We
do.
still haven't got you to sing your jingle yet, but we'll let you
We'll
sing
get
it, I
that.
guess.
Hey, you gotta have a news item. I will sing on the next one for sure.
Yeah.
A New Year's resolution. I mean,
Okay, yeah, we should sing about a New Year's resolutions. I like it.
Well, next time we'll record at happy hour so we can get you motivated to sing.
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
yes,
Yeah,
that'll help.
Yeah,
That'll help.
a little glass of bourbon always gets the music.
There you
going.
go. Oh, God.
Awesome. Well, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Pete, where can they reach out to you and Travel Boom?
Yeah, so the best thing if you want to get in touch with us here at Travel Boom is go to travelboommarketing.com. or you can also find us on LinkedIn at Travel Boom Marketing. Me personally, you can find me at pete.demeo@travelboommarketing.com, or on LinkedIn, it's simple, it's just pete.demeo as well.
Awesome. If anybody wants to contact Annie and I, you can go to alexandanniepodcast.com. And thank you again. Thank you to Travel Boom too. You guys have been wonderful supporters of the podcast. We truly appreciate that. And we appreciate everybody listening. So until next time, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.